Adapted from archaic translation by H.T. Francis and Ra. Neil. Jataka number 330. Sīlavīmaṁsa Jataka. Power on Earth, etc. This was a story told by the master when at Jetavana monastery, about a Brahmin who was ever proving his virtue. Two similar stories have been told before. In this case, the bodhisattva was the family priest of the king of Benares. In testing his virtue, he for 3 days took a coin from the royal treasurer's board. They informed against him as a thief, and when brought before the king, he said, "Power on earth beyond compare, virtue owns a wonderful charm. Putting on a virtuous air, deadly snakes avoid all harm." After thus praising virtue in the first stanza, he gained the king's consent and adopted the ascetic life. Now a hawk seized a piece of meat in a butcher's shop and darted up into the air. The other birds surrounded him and struck at him with feet, claws and beaks. Unable to bear the pain, he dropped the piece of meat. Another bird seized it. It too in like manner, being hard pressed, let the meat fall. Then another bird pounced on it, and whosoever got the meat was pursued by the rest, and whosoever let it go was left in peace. The bodhisattva on seeing this thought, "These desires of ours are like pieces of meat. To those that grasp at them is sorrow, and to those that let them go is peace." And he repeated the second stanza. While the hawk had anything to eat, birds of prey pecked at him in pain. When unavoidably he dropped the meat, then they pecked at him no more. The ascetic, going on from the city, in the course of his journey came to a village, and at evening lay down in a certain man's house. Now a female slave there named Pingala made an assignation with a man, saying, "You are to come at such and such an hour." After she had bathed the feet of her master and his family. When they had reclined down, she sat on the threshold, looking out for the coming of her lover, and passed the first and the middle watch, repeating to herself, "Now he will be coming," but at daybreak, losing hope, she said, "He will not come now," and lay down and fell asleep. The bodhisattva seeing this happen said, "This woman sat ever so long in the hope that her lover would come. But now that she knows he will not come, in her despair, she slumbers peacefully." And with the thought that while hope in a sinful world brings sorrow, despair brings peace, he uttered the third stanza. "The fruit of hope fulfilled is bliss. How differs loss of hope from this? Though dull despair her hope destroys, lo! Pingala calm sleep enjoys." Next day, going on from that village, he entered into a forest. And seeing a hermit seated on the ground and indulging in meditation, he thought, "Both in this world and in the next there is no happiness beyond the bliss of meditation." And he repeated the fourth stanza. "In this world and in worlds to be nothing can surpass ecstatic joy. To holy calm a devotee, himself unharmed, will none annoy." Then he went into the forest and adopted the ascetic life of a rishi and developed the higher knowledge born of meditation, and became destined to birth in the Brahma world. The master, having ended his lesson, identified the birth. "At that time I myself was the family priest." Source: adapted from archaic translation by H.T. Francis and Ra. Neil. Jataka number 331. Kokālika Jataka. They that with speech inopportune, etc. This story was told by the master at Jetavana monastery about Kokālika. The introductory story is told in full in the Takarika birth. Once upon a time when Brahmadatta was reigning in Benares, the bodhisattva was his valued minister. Now the king was very talkative. Thought the bodhisattva, "I will put an end to his talkativeness," and went about looking for a likely example. So one day the king came to his garden and sat down on the royal slab of stone. Above his head was a mango tree, and there in a crow's nest a black cuckoo had laid her egg and gone off. The female crow watched over that cuckoo's egg. In due course of time a young cuckoo came on from it. The crow, thinking it was her own offspring, took care of it, bringing food for it in her beak. The young bird, while still unfledged, uttered a cuckoo cry prematurely. The crow thought, "This young bird even now utters a strange note. What will it do when it is older?" And so she killed it by pecking it with her beak, and threw it out of the nest, and it fell at the king's feet. The king asked the bodhisattva, "What is the meaning of this, my friend?" Thought the bodhisattva, "I am seeking for an example to teach the king a lesson, and now I have got one." So he said, "Garrulous folk, great king, who talk too much out of season, meet with a fate like this. This young cuckoo, sire, being raised by the crow, while yet unfledged, uttered a premature cry. So the crow knew it was not her offspring and killed it by pecking it with her beak and threw it out of the nest. All those that are too talkative out of season, be they men or beasts, suffer like trouble." And with these words he recited these stanzas. "They that with speech inopportune offend, like the young cuckoo meet untimely end. Nor deadly poison, nor sharpened sword is half so fatal as ill-spoken word. The sage his measured words discreetly guides, nor rashly to his second self confides. Before he speaks will wise advice take, his rivals to trap, as Garuda the snake." The king, after hearing the religious teaching of the bodhisattva, from then on became more measured in his words, and increasing the glory of the bodhisattva ever gave him more and more. The master, having brought his lesson to an end, identified the birth. Kokālika in those days was the young cuckoo, and I myself was the wise minister. Source: adapted from archaic translation by H.T. Francis and Ra. Neil. Jataka number 332. Rathalathi Jataka. Wounding another, etc. This story was told by the master when he was at Jetavana monastery. About the family priest of the king of Kosala, who, it is said, as he was driving in his chariot through a village on his estate, came upon a caravan in a narrow road. And crying out once and again, "Out of the way with you," was so enraged at a cart not clearing out of his way that he threw his prod stick at the driver of the first cart. The stick struck against the yoke of the cart, and rebounding hit him on the forehead and raised a bump on his head. The priest turned back and went and told the king he had been wounded by some cart's movers. The cart's movers were summoned, and the judges examining into the case found the priest only was to blame. One day the matter was discussed in the Hall of Truth, how that the king's priest, who said he had been assaulted by some cart's movers, on going to law court was thrown in his suit. When the master came and inquired what the brethren were sitting in council to discuss. On hearing what it was, he said, "Not now only, brethren, but formerly also this fellow acted in precisely the same way." And he then told them a story of the olden time. Once upon a time when Brahmadatta was reigning in Benares, the bodhisattva became his lord justice. The king's priest drives to a village where he was headman, and acts in exactly the same way as in the other tale. But in this version, when the king heard the priest's story, he summoned the cart movers and himself sat in judgment. And without examining into the matter he said, "You have beaten my priest and raised a bump on his forehead, and ordered all their property to be taken from them." Then said the bodhisattva to him, "Sire, without even investigating the matter you order them to seize all their goods, but some men after inflicting wounds on themselves say that they have been wounded by another. Therefore it is wrong for one who bears rule to act thus without trying the case." He should not act till he has heard everything. And then he recited these verses. Wounding another, his own wound he shows, himself the offender, he complains of blows. Wise men, O king, of partial views beware, hear both sides first, then judgment true declare. The idle sensual layman I detest, the false ascetic is a rogue one. A bad king will a case unheard decide, anger in the sage can never be justified. The warrior prince a well-weighed verdict gives, of righteous judge the fame forever lives. The king on hearing the words of the bodhisattva judged righteously, and when the case was duly tried, the blame was found to rest with the Brahman alone. The master, his lesson ended, identified the birth. The Brahman played the same part in both stories, and I myself was the wise minister in those days. Source: adapted from archaic translation by H.T. Francis and Ra. Neil. Jataka number 333. Goda Jataka. Then were you, etc. This is a story told by the master while at Jetavana monastery, of a certain landowner. The introductory story has been told in full before. But in this case, as the husband and wife were returning home, after calling in a debt, in the course of their journey some hunters gave them a roasted lizard, asking them both to eat of it. The man sent his wife to fetch water and ate up the whole lizard, and when she came back, he said, "My dear, the lizard has run away." "Well, my lord," she said, "what can one do with a roast lizard that runs away?" She drank some water and afterwards at Jetavana monastery when sitting in the presence of the master, she was asked by him as follows. "Lay sister, is this man affectionate, loving and helpful to you?" She answered, "I am loving and affectionate to him, but he has no love for me." The master said, "Well, suppose he does behave thus to you. Do not be grieved. When he recalls to mind your virtues, he will give supreme power to you alone." And at their request he told an old world story. This old story is just like the one given above. But in this case, as the husband and wife were on their way home, some hunters saw how distressed they were and gave them a roasted lizard and asked him to share it between them. The royal lady tied it about with a creeper used as a string, and went on her way, carrying it in her hand. They came upon a lake, and leaving the high road sat down at the foot of a bow tree. The prince said, "Go, my dear, and fetch water from the lake in a lotus leaf, then we will eat this meat." She hung the lizard on a tree branch and went to fetch water. Her companion ate up all the lizard and then sat with face turned away, holding the tip of the tail in his hand. When she returned with the water, he said, "My dear, the lizard came down from the tree branch and made for an ant heap. I ran and seized it by the tip of its tail. The lizard broke in two and left in my hand the part one had seized and disappeared in the hole." "Well, my lord," she replied, "how can we deal with a roast lizard that runs away? Come, let us be off." And so drinking the water, they journey to Benares. The prince when he came to the throne gave her the title, rank of queen wife, but no honor or respect was paid to her. The bodhisattva, desiring to win honor for her, standing in the king's presence asked her, "Lady, is it not the case that we receive nothing at your hands? Why do you neglect us?" "Dear sir," she said, "I get nothing from the king. How then should I give a present to you? What is the king likely to give me now? When we were coming from the forest, he ate a roast lizard all by himself." "Lady," he said, "the king would not act after this sort. Do not speak thus of him." Then the lady said to him, "Sir, this is not clear to you, but it is clear enough to the king and me," and she repeated the first stanza. "Then were you first known to me, When in forest depths, O king, roasted lizard broke its string and from bow tree branch got free. Though under robe of bark, I think, sword and coat of armor was seen. Thus spoke the queen, making known the king's offense in the midst of his courtiers. The bodhisattva, on hearing her, said, Lady, ever since the time when your husband ceased to love you, why do you go on living here, making unpleasantness for both? And he repeated 2 stanzas. To one that honors you, due honor show with full payment of good service done. Give no kindness on miserly ones, nor shun those that would affect your presence. Forsake the wretch who has forsaken you, and love not one who has for you no love, even as a bird forsakes a barren tree, and seeks a home in some far distant grove. The king, while the bodhisattva was yet speaking, called to mind her virtues and said, My dear, ever so long I observed not your virtues, but through the words of this wise man, I have observed them. Bear with my offense. This whole realm of mine I give to you alone. And on this he spoke the 4th stanza. Far as in his power may be, gratitude a king should show. All my realm I grant to you, gifts, on whom you will give. With these words the king conferred on the queen's supreme power, and thinking, it was by this man that I was reminded of her virtues, he gave great power to the wise man also. The master, having brought his lesson to an end, identified the birth. At the conclusion of the truths, both husband and wife attained fruition of the first path. The husband and wife of the present story played the same part in the old tale. But I myself was the wise minister.